Hi, this is Maisie Hayes. The bill I chose to write about for essay number 3 is the Victim Targeting Penalty Enhancement Bill that passed in March 2019 and was signed in April 2019. You guys probably have heard of this as the hate crime bill, even though it's actually discouraged to call it that because Senator Thatcher, who pushed this bill, as well as the ACLU that sponsored and approved it, wanted to make it clear that this wasn't about hate crimes, but was actually about enhancing penalties on crimes that they believe and the courts believe had victim targeting involved. So, I mean, it's pretty interesting because most of the time the press referred to it as the hate crime bill, but it's actually called the Victim Targeting Penalties Enhancement Bill. So, like I said, the Victim Targeting Penalty Enhancement Act was passed March 14th, 2019, and was signed April 2nd, 2019. But this was actually not the first time that this or an idea of this bill was introduced to the court. It was originally introduced 4 years previous, where it failed because of lots of things that they decided needed revising, mostly because there was a lot of concern that it was impeding freedom of speech. And it also was just not getting as much attention and as much campaigning as it did previous to this vote. Senator Thatcher picked it up 4 years ago and decided to revise and campaign heavily on this bill so that it could push through because he saw how much it was needed in our community. Another really big reason that this bill was successful was due to an unfortunate attack that happened 1 year previous in November of 2018. There was an attack on Mr. Lopez and his son by a man with a lead pipe who multiple times phrased to the police that he was just looking to kill Mexicans and harm Mexicans, and it was a really terrible, brutal attack. Luckily, Mr. Lopez and his son survived, but they had to recover for a long time. And this attack went and was spread nationally, which gave a lot of uh, glance to Utah politics because we couldn't charge this perpetrator with another level of crime because of the way he targeted Mr. Lopez and his son, and how the Latin American community of Salt Lake City felt afterwards. They felt scared, and they felt like not only was this man and his son attacked, but their whole community was victimized and attacked, which is a really big reason why this bill was seen as important by so many people. So, a really large goal of this bill was to create a strong stance against victim targeting oriented crimes that are based on biasness and create a higher level of penalty enhancements for these offenders. Senator Gary Herbert stated that he expects this bill to serve as a powerful tool in providing critical protections to marginalized groups and persons. Not just in Utah, but also nationally, there has been a lot of crimes targeting people based on religion, ethnicity, orientation, sexually and gender identity, as well as gender in general. And by creating a strong stance as a state, many politicians and people of this state believe that this can help discourage violent crime against those that are based on victim targeting altogether because of that strong stance we are taking. A really important part of this bill is that it specifically states the parameters of the factors of target populations, including race, ethnicity, disabilities, sexual orientation, gender identity, political identification, religion, even age, physical disability, mental disability, specifically separate, and social class and status. Things that we haven't had in bills yet in the Utah legislature. We haven't had that protection for target populations. And it's really important to have that so that we can legally label things as victim targeting and say, this person was targeted based on their race, and we know because of this. This is something that we couldn't do legally before. We could speculate and we could make that assumption based on the evidence, but we couldn't legally put it in writing and put it into somebody's penalty for what they have done. Mr. Halemarker does a really great study on this where he talks about when a bill specifically states target populations, like this bill does, it gives states a lot more legal ability to label crimes as victim targeting, where before it couldn't legally do that, even if we had the evidence for it. Like in the Mr. Lopez case I talked about in the earlier slides, we didn't have the legal ability to label that as victim targeting based on appearances and race and ethnicity. Whereas now, based on this bill, we can label that as victim targeting, which is what it was. A really big question that critics ask is, will it limit freedom of speech? According to Gansky, people's biggest fears about this bill is that it will punish improper thinking and speaking, even if that improper thinking and speaking might not be directly linked to the crime. A person should not be punished for freedom of speech and those behaviors if it doesn't directly link to the crime, and it can't be proved that that went into victim targeting and that their crime was targeted motivated. This bill actually requires victim targeting penalty enhancements to be proved beyond reasonable doubt and have substantial evidence that links them directly to the crime. For example, if the Mr. Lopez attack had occurred after this bill was passed, there would most likely be substantial evidence and proof that this was a victim targeting assault because of the claims that the perpetrator made about targeting and based on appearances and ethnicity, which is a lot of what this perpetrator stated to the police officers. Therefore, that would be direct speech that implicates this perpetrator. Without that direct implication, though, not all speech said by the perpetrator is victim targeting, and that's the difference, and that's the difference that this bill makes it so that everybody should feel safe with this bill and that nobody should feel like their freedom of speech is being limited. So, in conclusion, this bill is going to be able to provide the legal grounds that we need as a state to make sure all of our communities feel safe by protecting communities and populations against victim targeted crimes through the provisions this bill provides, like defining what a target population is and creating a strong stance and showing that substantial evidence is needed so your freedom of speech is not going to be harmed. It is used to protect victims and victimized communities, which is really important. We want all of the communities and populations within our government to feel like they can be safe and they can be protected equally under the law, something that a lot of people have been missing or feels like they're being gypped on, and that's something that we want to rectify as a state government, and we want to show that stance to our nation proudly that we are here to protect everybody in our community. I am in strong support of this bill, and I'm really interested to see how it affects legal proceeding in the future and if people can apply this in the way it should be applied.